Richard Terry, 582 Canton Street, Precinct 6 representative, and currently chair of the Capen Reynolds Farm Use and Development Committee. And I'm also a member of the Friends of the Capen Reynolds Farm for a long time. And I have a presentation here, a PowerPoint presentation, with the help of our acting town manager to get it from PDF into a usable form. And I met our secretary tonight for the first time at 6:30 when she reviewed it for me to make sure it worked. Thank you. Can you pull up the first screen?
Is it the first icon on the list, the first one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Basically, I'm going to do a little background for those who are not familiar, both on the board as well as the audience. This was created in 2012, by town meeting to develop a use, both passively and actively, for the property at Capen Reynolds Farm, approximately 38 acres. And we were given $20,000, similar to Glen Echo, to come up and find a consultant who could guide us in a conceptual way. We were able to choose a gentleman by the name of Bernie Goba of Goba Associates. He's an architect, well known for his, by his credentials, and he helped us come up with a concept, which we went to town meeting, I believe in 2015, and were able to secure a vote that gave us $278,000. Next slide, please. These are pictures were taken a couple of years ago, but the house has not changed in any way. And it's a good representation of the house, its sturdiness, and if you look at the roof line, it's dead level. That's because there are 12 steel alley columns under it, in which the Friends of the Capen Reynolds Farm partially funded equally with the Conservation Commission. Those are the signs that were proposed for the signage that's being put around town. They haven't been finished yet. The Capen family had lived there since 1757, continuously till 1975. Next slide, please. This is a good view, standing at the barn, looking west to the side of the house. And you'll notice that stone wall. That stone wall is going to be moved, as you'll see later in this presentation. And it's actually in the budget. Next slide, please. This is a Google slide or photograph, and I purposely put it there so to acquaint people with the structures on the building. And from this point of view, there's a lot of structure there. And if we go from left to right at Pine Street, you'll see the main house is the very left, and then there's a structure next to the driveway. That was Bertha Capen's bedroom and sunning room. And then there's a garage, which is at the top of the driveway. And just to the right of the driveway, there's a row of trees. By the way, many of those trees have been removed or trimmed by the Malpe family tree company pro bono a year ago last Arbor Day. They brought a crew of 8 and all their expensive equipment and really did this town a nice service. The trees that were pruned or removed were done in conjunction with Jim Conlon's advice with Malpe Company. So it was really a nice effort, and we thank him immensely. But the trees that you see between, just to the right of the driveway, is actually obscuring that stone wall. The stone wall will be moved further to the right, closer to the barn, and the barn is the larger of the two structures to the far right. The smaller of the two structures, which is parallel to Pleasant Street, we refer to it as the carriage house. Doesn't have a carriage in it, but that's what we call it. And to the rear of the buildings, you'll see what looks like a garden, and that is a community garden that was there for some years. It's since been, hasn't been upheld lately, but that's where we propose to have our new community garden. Next slide, please. These photographs are actual photographs of the property with the people superimposed on trails that we were considering doing. The trails have been abandoned for the time being because in our initial walkthrough with Jim Conlon, trying to determine the wetlands, we missed a lot. And when the survey was done by Conoco Engineering, they did, according to our town engineer, a phenomenal job for a phenomenal price. In it, they found a lot more wetlands. That caused us to reconsider the cost of putting trails with raised wooden walkways. It really was outside the budget based on our initial assumptions of lesser wetlands. So we'll address the pathways at another time. Next slide, please. And this is a winter scene. Again, these are all actual trees and photographs of the property with people superimposed. The plan to put these pathways in was to try to disturb it as little as possible, preferably move only small brush, but not take down any large trees. Next slide, please. I'm standing on Pleasant Street looking east, right down the right-of-way, and this area was strongly considered for the dog park. But after much thought and consideration, it was determined that the fight with the power company wasn't worth it. And we have a better solution. So, next slide. This is the original concept of what the community garden would be, where it would be, the parking, those hash marks that you see. I have a pointer, but it doesn't work on a TV screen. Can I approach the screen?
Just take the microphone with you.
Oh, it's portable. Oh, good. Here, and here were considered for parking. Minimal invasion, but enough to support those who may want to come to the community park, community garden, or the dog park, or use the pathways. These pathways were considered going towards Glen Echo Boulevard, across the street to Pine Street, and up towards the Dawes School. As you'll see in another slide, the wetlands were extensive, and we had to reconsider. Next slide, please. This is on Pine Street, and I'm looking right down behind the building. This is the house, the carriage shed, and the barn. And this is where we'll have an entrance for handicap parking, which will be very close to the community garden, and will also be for utility purposes like delivering soil or picking up trash and things of that nature. We don't want to use it extensively because the sight lines on this road are tough on Pine Street, if you're familiar with it. Next slide, please. And then this is a more conceptual drawing of what we were proposing at the time of town meeting, and hiking trails, gardens, with possible extending it if the use was warranted. And this represents the barn, the carriage shed, the garage, sunroom, main house, summer kitchen, and the woodshed and the 3-hole outhouse. Next slide, please. This is, again, another actual photograph. They actually caught us a hawk flying about, and this is what we think the community garden would look like. It has a rectangular pergola. We've since changed that to a circular pergola. That's really not a big issue, but that's what we hope it to look like. Next slide, please. This was the cost budgets that we had, and we ended up increasing it a little bit to $278,000. Next slide, please. Oh, hold that just first. Could you back up? You can see the walking trails and bridges and so forth. We had 3 small bridges. Once we learned about the wetlands, that doubled, more than doubled, not only in numbers, but in length. So it really had a great impact on it. Next slide, please. You know what? We didn't get that. This was not my modified version. There's a couple of things I want to see. Can we go back? Yeah. Are you in E?
My what?
In
This is the one.
yeah, right there.
Engine?
Yep. Let's try that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Hold that slide. This slide represents the most current drawing by the engineering company of Center Mount. Center Mount is headed up by Shane Oates. He and his engineers, civil engineers, originally were with Conoco, who Conoco did the initial survey and started the whole planning process with us. Last summer, there was a mutiny on the bounty, so to speak, and the entire civil engineering group left that firm. It literally stopped us dead for about 4 months until they regrouped, got their insurances in place, and our town procurement officer was able to sign them back on, mainly because they had all this background. We didn't have to start over with a new group, but we lost 4 months. because of that hiccup in that company. I even tried to intervene, spoke directly with the owner of Conoco, who was on holiday in Florida, and he promised me he would call our Mark Tisdale and try to straighten things out. He never called. And so the departure by the civil engineers proceeded. We're now back on track. Our hope had been that by this time we would have already gone to bid and work would be done. But because of that delay, we're at this stage. Right now, I was given notice by Shane Oates that he intends to give a notice of intent to the Conservation Commission in December, and I have a statement I'll read to you in a minute. But on this plan, the dog park, which had been up here in the right-of-way for the power company, we relocated it down to here, and it's noted by this dotted line, which is actually a chain-link fence, which is about this high, which has been determined as a good height for dog parks. And there's two parts to the dog park. This larger portion, which is around 14,000 square feet, is for larger dogs. The smaller part here is about 4,000 square feet, and it's for smaller dogs. Evidently, smaller dogs pick on the big dogs, and then we have a problem. And in my interviewing of different dog parks, primarily in the city of Boston, and talking to people, actually going out and doing interviews, like in South Boston and a few other places, I've seen this configuration, not necessarily this particular configuration, but the small and large dog park associations, with double gates. One here to get in, and then one to get into the large dog park or the small dog park, so dogs can't inadvertently scoot out. This area right here, behind the barn, is an ideal place. It's well protected from the street by heavy wooded trees, some this big in diameter, which will give excellent shade. And one of the things I found in my reviewing dog parks was there was no shade. It was a blazing hot place in the summertime. This area has a lot of trees, but most of them are small, probably in a diameter of 4 to 5 inches, maybe less than a foot, and then there's some really large trees. And our intent is to leave all the large shade trees and remove all the low brush and underbrush. So we have a really nice place for not only the dogs, but the people. In addition, it's been flagged by Centermount. This dotted line not only represents the fence, but it also represents an existing a stone wall. And we've decided that the fence will be inside the stone wall so that we don't have a dog or a person stuck between the stone wall and the fence as they're trying to retrieve a dog. We'll keep the fence, or the stone wall outside the fence. We don't want to disturb stone walls. That brings me back to this stone wall, the one we saw earlier in the picture, which is closer to the house. And to develop the parking we need to accommodate those who want to go to the community garden or the dog park, the best solution we could come up with in terms of dollars that we have available and where to put it is where the existing driveway is, this is the house, and expand it this way towards the barn so we can accommodate about 20 vehicles. And this has been designed with the by Centermount in conjunction with town engineers' requirements in terms of size of parking lot space, width and length, and turnabouts. A little more tweaking on the stone wall where that will ultimately end up. Our goal is to have that wall literally dismantled and reassembled exactly as it is. Some people might say it's a waste of money, but stone walls are an important aspect of this culture. And everyone that's been involved has felt the same way, so we're going to keep it that way. The community garden, right here, you'll notice the area I mentioned for the ADA compliance, that will be over here. There'll be a walkway into the garden area. These will be raised gardens for those who are handicapped. You can't bend down. We'll have traditional gardens as well. We will provide water in a spigot form from the house water to the garden, as well as to the dog park, so they do need to have water. And the material choices for pavers and shrubbery and lighting, preferably solar paneled lighting along the walkways, is still up for decision, but the actual land preparation is where we're focusing the most right now. And with the notice of intent going out in December, we hope to get the bidding underway right after the first of the year. Now, let me read one statement from our current engineer, Shane Oates. And then I'll take your questions. Centerbound Engineering will be submitting a notice of intent to the Stoughton Conservation Commission.
I'm sorry, Richard, could you use the...
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. Centerbound Engineering will be submitting a notice of intent to Stoughton Conservation Commission since we are working within 100 feet of bordering vegetated wetlands. Hopefully will not require a site plan submission to the engineering department based on the minimal disturbance on the project. We're not building any structures. A pergola is not considered a structure in that sense. And the dog park is going to have minimal tree removal. And that's pretty close. That's close. That's within 100 feet. The goal would be to have the engineering department complete an administrative level review of the permitting plan. And they anticipate submitting to both Conservation Commission and Engineering Department in December. I have one last item to talk about on this plan, is the budget. We were awarded $278,000, and since then, we've spent approximately $41,000 on surveying, which was extraordinarily complete based on the engineering department here by Conoco. Not only did they do meets and bounds, they did elevations. They noted every right-of-way. They noted every area of wetlands and also every stone wall. They noted everything. It's a very complete drawing. And the price was so low that the town first thought they were not capable of doing it. When they checked their work, they realized they did good work. So I think Mark Tisdale indicated that should have been double that price. So with that, they became our in-house engineers until the mutiny. In addition, since Conoco has the civil engineers have restructured as Centermount, they were awarded the engineering aspects, which came in around $55,000 and change. So to date, we've spent, we have a balance as of today of $181,175.87. That represents 34% of our total spendings of the total amount of $278. It's our hope we can do this for that money. Any questions?
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Just one quick question. When does the engineers, the consultants that you have on board, when do you guys think you're going to be going out to bid?
I'd repeat the question?
When do you guys think you're going to go out to bid for the work?
Well, it's going to have to go before Conservation first, and then the review by the Engineering Department regarding the wetland, 100-foot buffer. Once that's completed in December, and I've been working very closely with Maureen Doherty all along the way, as well as our Engineering Department, I will try to push this as fast as I can. We want it more than you do, believe me. One last thing. There is a $38,000, it wasn't a borrowing amount, that Conservation provided for some repairs, stabilization on the farmhouse. And our initial effort with Paul Gaffoon was through the in-house architect, who promoted putting in modern double-hung windows that were completely out of place in terms of the cost. By his estimate, replacing 85% of the windows, it blew the entire $38,000 budget. Not only that, but it just didn't match the fabric of the house, and so we rejected that outright. We went out and looked at alternatives. One of the alternatives is old-time wooden storm windows, and there's a couple on the house to this day. They're probably 75 years old, and they are in good condition. The wood is. Coincidentally, I was at a picnic last year in Jamestown, Rhode Island, and my friends had an old home that they restored, and they had this particular window that I had been looking at online from a company from Iowa that specializes in all kinds of storm windows and windows like we have in the old, the original library. And I asked my friends what they liked about it. They both work for Raytheon. They're detailed engineers. They do things, they check it out, and they said, it fits the house in terms of the fabric, it's easy to install, and it's durable, and it provides the insulation we need, and it's not a double pane window, which has a failure rate, a high failure rate. Never come close to 50 or 60 years that a wooden storm would, and they're hung easily. So the Friends of the Capen Reynolds farm bought one, and it's been painted red, and Paul has offered to have the in-house carpenter go up there and actually hang it. And so we can determine how we can do this. By doing that, we eliminate a general contractor who's taking 20% of this effort and a lot of wasted time and money, and it can be done very quickly. Paul and I hope to get together probably right after the holiday, Thanksgiving, and put that window up, have the members of the Capen Farm Development Committee look at it and make a decision, and if it goes forward, we'll purchase them with this money. And if we don't have enough, the Friends of the Capen Reynolds Farm is more than happy to help donate some. Any questions on that aspect?
So, just real quickly, Richard, so, Mark, we have a website that's Capen Reynolds Farm Use and Development Committee. Is that the same thing as the Friends of Capen Reynolds? The reason I'm asking is because I think this presentation should probably be posted to our website, to the town website, and maybe if we need to break out a segment on that for the Friends of Stoughton, of Capen Reynolds, then that might make sense. And any narrative, Richard, you could provide, or even a video clip of your presentation just now so that people could click on it and see, to get more information about what you're doing and create awareness, because it's all important information. So, and I appreciate all the work you've put into this. So,
This was put together really hastily. I learned of this meeting Thursday night, and I already had a conflict, so I had to straighten that out. This would have been a little more informative, but yes, I'd be more than happy to do that. And there is a distinction between the Friends, whereas the Friends is strictly a volunteer group of people from town, and it's a 501c3. We have been since 1997.
okay.
And monies that we've raised have been, some of it's been put back into the house. Most of it's still in the bank, and we want to spend it sometime soon. They are, although I'm a member, the two groups are really separate in terms of their functions. One's a commission of the town, the other's a group of volunteers. By the way, I'm going to make a public appeal. This particular commission has 4 people. Rachel Morton, John Cody, who's present today, and Howard Hanson, who's not well, can't contribute, and myself. We need at least 1, possibly 2 more volunteers to help us on this. So if you know of anyone, point them at me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. And thank you for all you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks, Rich.